I want to go ahead and get started because, again, I know we're at 10, depending on what time you're in, time zone you're in. I'm in Central, so it's 101 here. I want to go ahead and get going so we can get through. We got a lot of stuff to go through. And we also have this set up. This is going to be a panel discussion. We'll do some introduction to kind of the topic that we want to be able to discuss. But, the ideal here is that we have the ability to be able to kind of have a panel discussion on this and then open it up for live Q&A for the people who are able to make this live to be able to ask questions. So real quick, just kind of some rules of engagement here for everybody. If you've not been on these Zoom webinars, there is a place down on your screen where you can do Q&A. As we get in, especially into the Q&A session, please use that Q&A box where you can pop that up and you can enter in questions there. Feel free, though, anytime as we're going through this to enter any questions you have that pop in your head. We will address as many as possible. And then we'll probably stick around afterwards as well to answer any that we may not get to if that is the case. But other than that, if you've used Zoom, this is pretty standard as far as the interface for it. So feel free to raise your hand. Feel free to send us a chat. But any questions you have, please put in the Q&A so we can address those as a group, and so everybody can kind of hear that. So today's agenda, we'll jump right into this. It's going to be based on generative AI. And of course, everybody knows this is a hot topic, things that we continue to hear about ourselves. And so the title is Demystifying Generative AI. And the reason for that is because we want to be able to kind of get through a lot of the noise that's out there and really get down to the points for real businesses, small, mid-market, wherever your business is, the things that are going to really affect you. So that's going to be the focus and the reason why we brought Ken and Rob in today, and we'll introduce him here in a minute, and to be able to kind of have that real business level discussion. We're not going deep into tech here. This is not meant to be a tech talk. This is, if you guys have seen some of the promotional stuff, this is for more of an executive view and strategy on how these things are used. And again, like we mentioned before, we'll have some panel discussion questions with Rob and Ken and between us, and then of course open this up for Q&A. This is a 4-part series, so we've got a number of different ways we want to look at this. I would really encourage you to attend all 4. These are going to be from a little bit different perspective for each one, so it's very worth your time to be able to show up for these. This first one we're kind of going to jump right into the meat of it, but there's a lot of interesting things we're going to talk about next. So we'll introduce the next one at the very end. So just to kind of introduce ourselves, so if you're not familiar, TagCXO is a technology leadership company. That's a lot of different things, whether it's fractional leadership with tech executives that we have on staff, or it's working with tech executives to become better in their roles. Lots of different things that we do with working with companies, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. We have a lot more slides we could show here, but we just want to introduce that. And again, our tagline is technology leadership solved, because that's exactly where we focus on, making sure we're helping solve those problems with the technology leadership. And we partnered with Provision Analytics with Ken and Rob here, who you're going to be able to hear more of, thankfully, than me talking. And so these guys have been around, and you can see lots of logos there. And I'll let you guys read this. We're not going to go into this, but tons of real world experience and being able to from the analytics side of things, but also on the obviously the generative AI and AI in general. So Ken and Rob both have a ton of experience in real world working with waste management, the last place, but I'm really looking forward to hearing more about, not just strategically or thematically some of the things, but really hearing some of the real world experience they've had with these. So looking forward to jumping in that. With that being said, I'm going to stop talking and get into the people who really count for this conversation. And Rob, I think you're up next. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Tim. So listen, pleased to be joining everybody today. And certainly this is a hot topic. And by the way, it's been a hot topic for a while. Yeah. November 30th, 2022 is when ChatGPT 3.5 was released and became by far the most quickly adopted technology. Within 60 days, 2 million users, which was just unheard of. Nothing like it ever before in history. And then ever since then, I don't think you can watch an hour of CNBC without people talking about AI. So this is certainly something that's hit the world by storm. And I think people are still trying to make sense of all the information that's coming at them. And so for today, what Ken and I want to do is take some of the mystery out of generative AI, get really clear about what it is relative to the AI topic more broadly, because generative AI is a specific application of AI that certainly is poised to unlock a lot of value. By March, by the way, this isn't just ChatGPT and OpenAI. the whole world of software providers have for years been working on this technology. That's probably why it feels like it's exploded so quickly. But really, this was a decade or so in the making. Just a few months after ChatGPT 3.5 hit the market, Google and Microsoft and Meta and Salesforce and Bloomberg, companies that people are just now starting to learn about, Cohere and Anthropic, all of them coming out with these large language models and generative AI capabilities that we're going to be talking about today. It's no wonder that this past July, when Gartner released their hype cycle, and many of you on this call may be familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, it really tracks the trends of any new disruptive innovation in technology that comes through, and identified that, sure enough, no surprise to anybody, we are absolutely at peak hype cycle for generative AI. The question is it hyperbole? And we don't think it is. We think there is a tremendous amount of value to be unlocked around the technology. And just notice that the other thing that Gartner does is looks at the timeline that it takes from something to go from peak hype into the plateau of productivity. This is when people are actually really getting the meaningful value out of it. The promise gets delivered. And the timeline for this is pretty short. Gartner is recommending in their research 2 to 5 years. We know that for the next few years to get there, it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, just like it is with any other technology. I would argue that we're probably already in what they refer to as the trough of disillusionment. How do we know this? We're starting to hear the stories come out about how this is hard. We're starting to hear some stories around it could be expensive. We're starting to hear stories about some of the vendors are maybe over-promising their capabilities. We hear that some people have had some privacy and data loss issues around the technology. So listen, proceed with caution. And that's one of the things that Ken and I also want to equip this audience with today. How do you accelerate your curve through the hype cycle and accelerate your way into the plateau of productivity? So we're really excited to be joined with you today. I'm going to hand it over to Ken at this point to now really break down in very clear and easy terms, understand what is generative AI and what's different.
Thanks a lot, Rob. Before we jump into it, we wanted to just kind of take a pulse from you all. Kind of where are you in this cycle and in your journey with generative AI? So we put a quick poll here together, which says, how have you implemented generative AI in your organization? Are you not yet started? Are you planning to do it? Are you in pilots of this, or have you already developed generative AI in production? So if you would just take a moment, take a look at this poll and give it your best shot. Appreciate it.
I almost want to guess. I'm going to go planning it 25%.
I'd say higher.
You think so?
I would say, are we taking bets here? Yeah, planning definitely the highest. We'll see. I don't want to.
What do we got?
All right, we can close it up now and see what we got.
Oh,
there you go.
we have. So first of all, we have generative AI in production at 25%. That's an exciting number. I'd be interested to hear more about those. All right.
Very good. So what we wanted to do is first kind of level set on this term generative AI and artificial intelligence. There's been a lot of mystery in the term, a lot of concern, unwarranted concern around ChatGPT and the intelligence behind it. And is this making decisions for us? Is it ethical? Should we be concerned about it learning and growing and taking over? And I think amongst the uninitiated, it can really be concerning and cause concern for a lot of risk and so on. And so it's important to really understand what it is, how it works, because that's the best way to manage it and manage the risks is really a thorough understanding of what it is. First of all, the term AI has been around for actually since the 50s. We've been talking about artificial intelligence for a long time. And if you loosely define artificial intelligence as a computer that actually acts or decides as a human does, then computers have been doing this for several years. When you start to get into artificial intelligence making decisions and learning, then you start to get into machine learning algorithms that we put into place in the 80s and the 90s, natural language processing capabilities. And then in the 2000s, we got even smarter and started using neural networks and really modeling these algorithms based on how the brain works. So we're using a lot of deep learning capabilities for the last several years. to look at image analysis and to find complex patterns and networks and supply chains and so on. So the field of artificial intelligence and being able to really understand a massive amount of information, find patterns in that information and make decisions and recommendations based on that has been around for a while. And there's hundreds and hundreds of different use cases of how AI is helping companies today. What we saw with ChatGPT is really the emergence of this new branch of artificial intelligence, what we call generative AI, which is based on this deep learning neural network techniques, but brought together with language models that allow it to understand context amongst very complex large language documentation. And then the magic part is then by understanding that large language and context and understanding of documentation, produce output that seems like it's been written by a human. So generate language, generate sentences and paragraphs and summaries in a conversational way that we've really never had before. Even our natural language processing and all the word processing we've been doing historically has been counting words and estimating sentiment and doing some very basic stuff. But this generative AI capability now has the ability to understand complex documentation and then communicate back with us. It's almost as if for the first time we're able to talk and have a conversation with our computers. And that branch of artificial intelligence we call generative AI. And the way it works is just like other AI and predictive analysis and advanced analytics techniques. It learns from data, finds patterns, and then interacts. And specifically with large language models, we hear this word large language models a lot in the industry, and you see several of them down here, OpenAI being a large language model, Claude, Cohere being large language models. What these large language models are is they're actually built from massive amounts of data off the internet, documentation, Wikipedia, controversial sources like copyrighted information, but scanning basically the web, bringing together all that language and all that knowledge and understanding into a language model that now I can speak to it. It's beyond search. It's really understanding context of these documents. And then what ChatGPT did for us is it actually created a nice interface that we could then ask a question, so give it a prompt, and it would give us a response. And so that allowed us to talk to this large language model. And large language model is an important concept because these are proprietary, licensed models. There are some open source ones coming out, but as we talk about how do you implement large language models for your organization, it's important to know that there are a few out there that actually are quite expensive and time consuming to build and maintain and make accurate and so on. But that's what this large language model is in the middle. ChatGPT is an interface to those large language models. And basically what these large language models are, they're predicting the next word in a sentence or the next string of words in a concept and building up this language, building up these paragraphs based on what it's seeing in its large language models. It seems like a minute point, but it's really predicting, like, for example, here, the quick brown fox. This is likely to be the right response based on the predictions of the next words and the next concepts. Meaning it's really not understanding and thinking and becoming biased and doesn't have an intent to it. It's just a predictive model that's predicting words. It just happens to do it very, very well. So some cases of how the generative AI are put into practice, and Rob, maybe you can share a few of these for us.
Yeah. And so thanks for that, Ken. There's two ways that it's, I think, helpful to think about this. The first is from the key business processes that can be relevant and it can be applied. And so there seems to be a strong alignment across, any of the strategy firms and technology companies that these first five here, customer operations, marketing, sales, software engineering, research and development, those processes is where they expect about 75% of the value from generative AI to be delivered. And then the second area is around think of it from a role perspective, all of the different roles that you have across knowledge worker landscape is where the second half overall of all the value is going to come from. And so just let's unpack those for a few moments. Think of customer operations. We know that call centers are a difficult place, not only to staff resources, but to get good answers, because you got to consolidate all of the information, provide it in real time. This is an excellent application for a co-pilot for a service agent. Or You could even just automate that process through generative AI with a completely next level chatbot that we've all started to have some experience with that just don't seem to be that helpful. You can expect a significant improvement in those types of capabilities. Certainly from a marketing perspective, content creation, it is exceptional at creating multiple versions of creative content. Certainly a human is in the loop then to do the final polish, but a lot of content creation work can be done. All of the search engine optimization, product marketing, even outreach that can be done from a marketing perspective, or even sales. From a sales perspective, imagine as a sales rep being able to pull from the best information in the company to put together a best-in-class proposal, for instance, the amount of time that might save. Software engineering, this is where there's a lot of expectation that the most significant amount of early value is going to come from. Given that now they say that what's the most common programming language in the world these days? English. Would the Winklevoss twins even have needed Mark Zuckerberg to create Facebook now or sometime soon into the future? We know there's a lot of things that can be done with generative AI to accelerate and drive productivity in software engineering, the development, and by the way, in other areas of IT operations as well. And then research and development. Again, think about drug discovery, materials discovery. Think about creating the next kind of aerodynamic car and using the ability of generative AI to create multiple alternatives and then to interact. As Ken said, we can interact with our computers now. Hey, this is great, but I want you to add this feature. How would that change the genome sequence in this drug discovery process? It's just an incredible tool that can drive productivity in these processes. And then, by the way, just knowledge workers overall. One of the things that I think is pretty interesting, November 30th, 2022, ChatGPT 3.5 comes out. November 1st, 2023, here in just a few days, Microsoft will be releasing Microsoft Copilot powered by OpenAI and ChatGPT across all of its tools, whether that's Word and PowerPoint, email, even Teams. The amount of productivity and just assistance that we're going to get from these tools moving forward, you probably started to see a proliferation of note-taking tools that you or your colleagues might be using right now. There is just going to be an endless amount of ways that these generative AI tools start to improve what we do every day. It's really limitless. Back to you, Ken.
Yeah, and when you think about all of these use cases, it could be daunting. And I think as an executive of an organization, it's important to understand how your workforce is actually leveraging these tools. And we've kind of broken them down into three ways that your workforce is going to access these large language models. And they are each important because they have specific levels of security and concerns and things that you should be aware of as you're implementing and managing these capabilities. The first one is public applications like ChatGPT. So right now you can, and you hopefully already have, and your employees certainly are using ChatGPT to help them through any number of tasks, improving paragraphs, potentially writing poems or researching a topic on the internet. And the way that works is this is a free open language model, and OpenAI gives you this portal that you can log in and send your question and then get a response back. Seems simple enough until your employees are actually putting in, let's say, written code from your company and sending sensitive information through this prompt to get back better code, or proprietary information, or personal information. So it's important to note that as soon as that data goes into this prompt in ChatGPT, you're no longer protected with the information that could be leaving your organization. So understanding the potential risks of ChatGPT, and then the information that comes back. How is the information that comes back? How has that been vetted for your organization? What decisions are being made with the response? Now, are those responses somewhat biased or hallucinatory and giving you bad information? So how are your employees using this publicly available tool for interacting with these large language models? It's out there now. Unless you've locked them down, your employees are using them, and be aware of what that can entail. The next way that our employees and workforce are going to be using ChatGPT and these other large language models are through third-party applications. Rob just mentioned Copilot's coming out from Microsoft. We have large language models and generative AI capabilities built into Salesforce. We have generative AI capabilities built into Google applications and other SAP applications, and other enterprise applications are starting to embed these generative AI model capabilities within their software and software as a service models. So now you have a situation where you're getting great, let's say, call dialogues or call notes from Teams or your call center application. But how is that application taking the data from your enterprise, calling the same service, because at the end of the day, we're all calling the same service in the back end, sending that information, your company's information through their application to the back end to large language model and getting a response back. But what does that pipeline look like? How secure is that pipe? And who has the accountability for the information coming back, right? So even though your third-party vendors are embedding these capabilities into their software, it's just important to know how does that work, so you can control the potential sensitive information coming back and forth through your organization. And then the third method here is building a custom application. Some of the use cases that Rob showed earlier were companies that are already, and it looks like we've got a few on the call here that are actually piloting large language models in their organization, which is building an application and then sending information, controlling the information flow to the large language model and back. And this gives you great control, but of course it's the development of an application. So these are three primary ways you're going to see LLMs and generative AI models coming to your organization. So I mentioned a few of these risks potentially associated with large language models. Again, this is important just to note, just to make sure that you're managing the risks. There's certainly tremendous value that these language models are presenting, but a lot of boards and CIOs are concerned about the potential risks and want to make sure that they're protecting their company as we're deploying these kind of capabilities. So we thought it would be worth at least talking about a few of these risks. We've broken them down into two types. So there are risks to your organization itself. And then, of course, if you're following the AI news and articles and podcasts and so on, there's a lot of conversation around the impact of AI on society in general and who we are as humans. And so if you separate kind of organizational risks versus societal risks, and you can see those listed here as well, starting on the organizational side, certainly one large topic, which is actually part of this 4-part series that TAG is sponsoring, is around the use of AI in cyber threats and cybersecurity. So this is going to allow for much more intelligent phishing capabilities. And so how are we protected against the maturation of cyber threats and cyber criminals? And so that's a very critical and important topic, one to stay on top of. The other one that's just as disruptive and potentially risky for an organization is just industry disruption. Your competitors are leveraging this new capability to become much more efficient, finding new ways to garner revenue and new ways to reduce costs. How is this disrupting the industry, and what do companies do that are falling behind? So this capability will be disruptive and one that you should lean into to make sure that you're not left behind. But some specific operational risks that we kind of alluded to here a moment ago is around data loss. So as you send data through to this prompt, Samsung was famous in the news for one of their employees sending over information that had security codes in it over into a large language model. And so this kind of data loss is very important, and one of the first things you should be concerned about when implementing a large language model. Hallucinations is really important. This is the large language model, as I mentioned earlier, what it's just basically doing is predicting words that are likely to happen next. So if it's trained on bad data or trained on incomplete data, it'll do the best it can to kind of create the end of the sentence. But it might be nonsense. It's just going to do the best it can based on the information that's been given. So there's a lot of training that has to be done alongside these large language models to fine tune them to be relevant to your business context. And there are ways and methods to shape the prompts and load the data in and fine tune these models so that they're more relevant. But certainly if you just use a current open capability, you might come back with some responses that look good and hard to see face value that they might not actually be accurate. So training and validating is absolutely critical. So without reading the rest of them, those are some critical ones that are going to hit you right off the gate. And then, of course, there's staying ahead of the legal and regulatory landscape when it comes to how AI should be used in the organization. We're probably all already familiar with the California Consumer Privacy Act and the GDPR, which were launched a couple of years back to help protect consumer data and consumer privacy around their data, and gave certain rights to consumers to be able to recall their data and know how their data is being used. The extension to kind of data privacy is now this new wave of regulations coming out around the use of AI. And so beyond just the use of data, these are about the use of AI. And so the European Union published their AI Act, which is going to effect at the end of this year. Companies need to comply in 2 more years. But it's basically saying if you're using artificial intelligence in your application suite, and or if you're leveraging artificial intelligence to do your business, you are accountable for these things. And it's interesting to see around the fact that you need to demonstrate the transparency of how these algorithms are actually making decisions. So that needs to be made available. It needs to be explainable. You need to demonstrate that you've managed for bias. So, if you have biased data and you make biased decisions, you need to demonstrate that you have methods and processes in place to monitor and avert bias. You have to have a human in the loop in these processes, and your consumers have to have the ability to say, listen, I don't want an AI generated decision. I want a human generated decision. They have a right to ask you for that. So as we're building out these AI systems and AI solutions, it's really important to stay abreast of these regulations that are coming down. Haven't hit the US yet. The US has published this AI Bill of Rights, which is basically guidelines, which will probably form into regulations into next year, but certainly important to be aware of those as we deploy these solutions.
Thanks, Ken. So as we think about the path forward, in the conversations, it seems to be one of 4 things that you hear people talk about. The first is, hey, we're just going to play wait and see. This is brand new. We're not really sure if there's any there. We're going to let other folks, figure it out. Listen, the strong suggestion there is at least proceed with caution. It's one thing to say, I as a company don't want to be using it, but you got your employees that are out there using ChatGPT, and so there are some risks associated with the wait and see stance, which is why I think a lot of people are at least saying we're going to want to take some steps to understand the risk, to protect our business from data loss, from some of the examples that Ken gave a moment ago, and start to educate our organization around these tools. And so we call that really more of the protect mode stance. Now, still, there's a lot of folks and companies that say, really, we see the transformative nature of this. And as Ken mentioned, we see the risk, by the way, if we're, in our industry, behind the first movers. And so we want to explore. We want to take a thoughtful and deliberate approach to beginning to experiment and learn in a very thoughtful and deliberate way from these tools. The one that really concerns us is when we're talking to folks and they're saying, we're undecided and we're not really sure who has responsibility for the decision. I think our number one message that we would invite folks to consider is, as leaders, we each have a responsibility to make sure our organizations are intentionally making a decision. To continue to be undecided is really to play wait and see, but without the intentionality of making sure you're at least aware of the risks. You're really just adrift. And so our strong recommendation would be that everybody who is in the position to be responsible for driving decision in their firm, get one made in their company, and at a minimum, take the steps to protect the company from data loss, from some of the risk, and begin to educate your organization. With that, I think, Tim, we're over to you.
Yes, and I appreciate that perspective, because the whole we're going to wait and see or do nothing is kind of scary. This whole thing can be a little scary if you're not familiar with it, if you're not into it, you're not a techie person. It can kind of be overwhelming. But no, I appreciate you guys. Part of what we wanted to do, and the goal of this is this 4-part series is to lay these out, and we'll start digging into these and helping executives who are facing these things understand where they need to dig into. So they're not just jumping into this blindly, and so they can have some guidance to be able to understand, how do they kind of step into this and And it doesn't have to be that you all of a sudden jump in this, now we're in and now we're doing all these things. There's a path to that, and we'll kind of probably, I'm sure, talk about that through some of these questions you guys have. So let's kind of start off with some of the panel questions that we had. I know we came up with a few. Please, again, as we're going through this, if there's any questions from anybody from the attendees, please put those in the Q&A. We've got some that we'll run through as well to kind of give you a little bit, more conversation on these back and forth. But feel free to have your input as well. The first thing I wanted to kind of start off with, Rob, was very back at the beginning. You showed the chart, and I love that chart that kind of shows, how the Gartner hype cycle, how things have kind of taken off. And I can tell you, I've probably been one of those that followed that myself. I was, excited to see it come out, went out and started trying things and said, well, it doesn't really sound like me, or, whatever, and, kind of fall off. And then you kind of start learning, okay, well, this is how you actually use this. So what would you say, to those who say this is just hype, you're not going to really replace, my job with this, because, I've seen what it can do. I can do much better than that, or whatever. What would you say to those people who say this is just a trend that's going to go away at some point?
Yeah, is this a fad? Is it just a party trick? And
Yeah.
we won't be talking about this in a few months. Listen, I can just understand, because even in my own experience, you do that first interaction with ChatGPT, and it really blows your mind, right? And as you continue to work with the tool, you start to realize that it's heavily limited, and by the way, it can be wrong, and the other things. And so it's certainly understandable that people would feel that things are overhyped right now. I think there's a few things I would point to just to underscore our conviction around the use of generative AI and how pervasive it's going to be. The first is compared to the metaverse, which was probably the last big thing that was hyped the last few years. We have over 10 times the amount of peer-reviewed articles over several years, sustained over time, around artificial intelligence, generative AI. This is very clearly something that has been driving a lot of investment leading up to now on a whole other scale. And by the way, I think maybe the canary in the coal mine also is, what do you see from the large IT services providers and technology companies? You may have seen the headlines that Accenture is investing $3 billion to get prepared to serve their clients based on what they're hearing from their clients. EY, as a matter of fact, I think came up with $1 billion. There is just an unprecedented level of investment in this capability. So we know that it's going to have some lasting power. And then you just think of what is the potential? What is the promise? This may be a little overstated, but ARK Invest, which by the way was early on NVIDIA, which is one of the core technologies that's now powering. They invented the GPU early, the GPU. They've, in a lot of ways, what's powering what's happening with generative AI right now. ARK Invest is out there suggesting that there will be more economic value created this decade by 2030, from 2020 to 2030, from generative AI than the internet has created since it was conceived. Now, this is crazy talk. These are huge numbers, but even if they're halfway right, we know that we're up for quite a wild ride. And at a minimum, we know the cat's out of the bag. You can go to a website right now called There's an AI for That. And there are literally thousands of tools that are out there for anything you can possibly conceive of to try to help drive some productivity and things you do from a day-to-day basis. So listen, the question is it hype? Yes, we are at peak hype right now. Is it hyperbole? We don't think so. We think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that this is going to have a transformative effect, significant transformative effect on the way business is conducted.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Robin. I think for me, part of my evolution with it is viewing this more as a tool rather than just this fad out there that's going to replace everything that everybody's doing. And just like any tool, you have to learn how to use it. So like I said, when I first got on there, you get the whole cool factor of something's talking back to me, I can type whatever. But then when I actually try to use it to create some an email for a sales cycle or something like that, and then I'm looking at it, it's like, well, that really doesn't sound like me. That didn't. I mean, I can do much better on my own. But then you start learning, okay, this is how you actually use this to make it work for me, and learn my voice, learn my tone. There's a learning process to it, and I think once I understand this is a tool, all that stuff really, like you said, is comes into play. Where just like the internet changed things so much, just like phones and everything, all these big devices. I think, like you said, this is going to be one of them. One other thing that you mentioned, and Ken, I like the way you broke down, between the ChatGPT, the generative AI, the actual co-pilots, and the individual applications within inside the companies. But the co-pilots are something I think that we're now just starting to see come out more and more. I'll be honest with you, I have very few applications now that I use that don't have something that they want you to tie in ChatGPT or something like that into it. So when you mention, the great financial benefits to this, number one, where do you see that coming from? Is it just a productivity thing using those tools? Is there really going to be that level of financial gain that's going to be gained from it? What are your thoughts kind of from that on the co-pilots and all those things that are directly involved in it?
No, that's a great question, because if I'm a CFO, I want, show me the money. Like this is all
Yeah.
interesting conversation. So let's talk macro first. So you already heard ARK Invest's proclamation, but so McKinsey came out with a study, and again, they broke down by processes and roles and how they could identify economic value that would be generated by these tools. And they came up with a $4 to $6 trillion economic benefit from generative AI. Okay, so this is a big background number. And by the way, just to put that in perspective,
Yeah.
At the $4 trillion number, you would be right there with Japan and Germany as vying for the third largest economy in the world. These are massive numbers. And so you have to ask yourself, where is that going to come from? And we're very early in this, but we do have some studies that are just now starting to come out, which are very encouraging. So Harvard, Wharton, and MIT, all three of them came together to work with one of the top strategy houses, strategy services firms, and had nearly 800 of their staff leveraging ChatGPT for productivity enhancement tools. And what they found, studying this cohort relative to their peers who were not allowed access to ChatGPT, they got 12% more tasks completed. They completed them 25% more quickly and with a 40% higher quality. You can go out and find the study, and it's 50 pages long and quite illuminating around what we can expect to see coming around the corner. Even then, though, you got to ask yourself, okay, great, so that's productivity, but again, I'm the CFO. Where does that show up in the in EBITDA? And I think what you then start to say is, all right, show me some examples around how this is going to either reduce cost or drive revenue. And let me just give you two very quick examples that we're starting to see emerge. We think early on, a lot of the cost is going to be identified and pulled out of IT. It's from a development perspective. So if we can get 20% more efficient in software engineering, application maintenance, some of our IT operations, that can be reinvested in supporting these other use cases that we've talked about. Early reports out of people using the Microsoft GitHub Copilot, for instance, is somewhere between 20 and 40% efficiency. There's a bit of a range, but is a material, measurable productivity impact of using these tools. Now let's talk about it from a revenue side. So now you've taken some costs out of the business. Where am I going to redeploy that from a generative AI perspective to drive top line? There's a really interesting study, or I shouldn't say study, a use case pilot that was done in one of the largest IT services companies in the world around proposal generation. So imagine you take the best of the best proposals from the last 12 months. You have generative AI do your first draft for you. What they're finding is they're able to get 40% more proposals out as a result of leveraging this generative AI capability. And what does that do for them from an economic impact perspective? What they're finding is it's those smaller, kind of more $1 million level or sub deals that many times it just takes too much effort to respond to. But in currently today's economic environment, the fact that they're getting an uptick in winning those kinds of deals is actually doing a lot to support them as we're in this bit of a lull, as people have seen around digital spend. And so you can easily imagine starting to apply these tools in the areas that bring some cost and productivity efficiency, particularly in your IT space, reinvest that in use cases that we spoke about before, customer operations, sales, R&D, et cetera, to start driving further economic impact.
And just kind of a follow-up from that, Rob, as far as I mentioned earlier for myself, a lot of it was training and helping me figure out how do I use this thing the right way, because just because it's a tool doesn't mean it's going to give you everything you want, just like any other tool you use out there. If I don't know how to use Salesforce the right way, then it's going to be more danger than good. How do you see companies now starting to help their employees, not just give them access to it, but help their employees make sure they're using it in the right way to be able to get the right type of results? Do you guys see a lot of training and from a corporate level rather than just from individuals out there that they're helping them use it the way that they should be using it within the organization?
Listen, it's a great point, because what we've known forever in technology is you can get a great solution to market, but unless it's adopted and leveraged appropriately, that's the last step to extracting the value out of the tool. And we're seeing a few things. The first is that there are some trepidation that people have in using these tools, chiefly among them too. The way these generative AI tools work is by taking in all the information, by listening in on your meetings, by combing through all of your documents. So there's real privacy concern that folks have around using these tools. And so there's some real education, I think, that's going to be required over and above what you might normally have in a change management program, beyond just the training and maybe making sure people have the tools that they can leverage them. And then, of course, there's the concern that other people have around, is this going to cost me my job? Hey, listen, I love this idea that you're going to drive all this productivity. Does that mean there's going to be less of us there next year? And why should I be rushing to go use these tools? And I think the thing that's important there from a message perspective is, listen, I don't hear anybody talking about, and nor if you read all of the economic studies coming from these strategy houses and others, that there's going to be mass layoffs. I think what they're saying is you're going to be not replaced by AI, but somebody who's proficient using AI, because we're going to have a higher level of throughput that's going to be coming through this team. That's where a lot of the economic value is going to come from. And so, listen, I think there clearly needs to be traditional change management and communication programs. It is unique. It is as much a cultural transformation as it is anything else. And this is going to be something that you can see spreading through organizations. Starting November 1st, enterprise-wide release, Microsoft Copilot. And so you can imagine, as companies really unleash the value of those tools, it's going to come with a significant amount of training and development and support and education and cultural evolution inside a company.
Yeah. And I've heard the whole thing, if you're not the one using AI, you're gonna be replaced by the person who is. And definitely do, see that, just like any other tool that you use. If you don't know how to use the tools well enough, you're not gonna have the job to be able to use the tools. So it makes perfect sense. For most of the people that are on here, this is more of an kind of an executive crowd, whether you're the CEO level, CEO, CTO, whatever type of level you are. And as we know from working with them, you guys as well, they have a long list of priorities that they're having to manage along with that. And so, Ken, from your thoughts, and we showed the slide earlier about how do we go from, or how, the different types, whether we're a take action person, we're kind of wait and see. How do you kind of, as an executive, set your priority of where you need to be with that? If you already hadn't jumped all in and you're trying to figure out, well, where should I be? How do you think through that process and understand where you should be in that?
I think the first thing to do, which we alluded to, is really understand the potential risks of data loss, because that's you don't have to use the tool, but if your teams and your workforce are using, for example, ChatGPT, does that represent a potential data loss for your organization, and how you're controlling that? You really have two options. One option is you can just shut it down, and there are companies that have really just closed the pipes and said, when you're on our network, you don't have access to these tools. So we're just literally going to lock it down. And for these companies, especially companies that are in copyrighted domain spaces like music and documentation, that was a prudent decision to start with. So you could lock it down. The other thing you do is just monitor it. So you can say, we're not going to lock this down, but we're going to monitor it, and we're going to educate our employees, right? So we're going to give them some codes of conduct around how to use these tools, and give us some training on how to use these tools. And you alluded to training a moment ago in your question. And if you think about our codes of conduct training, and you talk about data training, we all hopefully are giving our employees training on what is personally identifiable information and how do we secure our clients' information and so on. It's the same type of training that we'll be doing on how to use these AI systems and how to use the results of AI systems. And so we're just going to be having to expand our expectations with our workforce on what is the proper way to use these tools or not, if you're going to allow them to have access to these tools. And then keep your eye on regulations. I would say monitor these regulations, because as they come down, and they're all responsible regulations that are going to protect companies and protect individuals, they're going to come with requirements for your own ability to demonstrate transparency and to demonstrate how you're using these tools. So keep your eyes on those, because you're going to be required to take action for several of those. So make sure you've either decided to lock it down and or monitor it. Definitely have a policy created. I think at minimum, there should be an AI policy within your organization for how you intend to use it. Get the training to your employees on the proper use of the tool, because there's only so much you can control. And then, monitor the regulations. And then finally, keep your eye on your competition. As we've talked about before, You can stay in this protect mode for so long, but just keep your eye on what's going on in the market.
Yeah, and I think that's like, it's almost two-phase. Like I said, how you protect yourself, and then how you use it to to compete and hopefully create a advantage with it. And where do you want to be in that cycle? Do you want to be someone who's just protecting versus do you want to be moving forward and kind of being on the not even on the front end, but somewhere in there where you're actually using it to provide that level of productivity for you. So yeah, and I think that's important. So when you talk about being able to implement this stuff, how do you know if I'm a take action person, how do I jump in and actually come up with a plan on what I need to be implementing this stuff in? And do you have to do it all at once? Are there, which I would assume, are there approaches to where you're more stepping into it piece by piece, how you decide the priority from that? And then, what are the approaches, how the approach is different if I'm a small versus mid versus a large company? I know there's kind of a number of things in there, but kind of what are your thoughts on those?
Yeah. Well, so if you do decide that there might be an opportunity here to lean in, and it's really a question of selecting the use cases that are going to be the most productive for you. And how do you select those use cases? It could be on, as Rob mentioned earlier, you could decide that, hey, we have too many people in our call center. We want to use generative AI to actually create more efficiency in our call center or interact with our customers in a self-service way to reduce that inbound need altogether and create a better customer experience. You may have contracts reviews that you have to do within your organization that are taking a lot of effort and time in backing up the system. You might want to explore how to use generative AI in those areas and so on. So I think the first thing to do if you're planning on leaning in is how do you kind of solicit for these potential use cases and then prioritize and select some pilots? Because what's interesting is this capability is new. This generative AI capability is new. And so most companies are in experiment mode or discovery mode on, hey, is this possible? Can this really get me the outcomes that I'm looking for? So you're really going to pilot and experiment with these capabilities. And so you should be soliciting for these ideas from your organization.
Yeah.
Now, before you solicit these ideas, everybody needs to understand what the heck is this. So you probably want to start with some general education to your business leaders. Say, hey, here's an opportunity for us. This is what this thing is. We're soliciting ideas. Prioritize those ideas based on potential impact, and then go through a process to select a pilot, and then get started and learn fast.
Yeah, and I know a lot of, again, as an executive, a lot of guys are not really wanting to get too much into the techie side of this. But I think, in my opinion, and just my experience as well, is just educating yourself on generally what's out there helps as well. I know for me, I do a lot of presentations, so learning that there's tools out there that I could actually go describe the type of presentation I wanted, and it would generate me at least a first copy that I could start from. And have to create, just even knowing that type of stuff is out there, I think just takes educating yourself and making sure you know that, because otherwise you're kind of flying blind, and then competition probably is not.
You're right, especially if there's a use case that you're looking at that somebody else has already solved. There's a lot to learn from that prior work. But I think that the biggest challenge right now, I think, is there's so much noise, right? Every software vendor is now talking about, hey, now new with generative AI. Here's your new toothpaste, now with generative AI. It's like, and how do you make sense of that? You're a CIO or CXO trying to run your business, and then all your vendors are coming in, your big 5 consulting firms, everybody's coming in saying they've got Gen AI. You have to have a PhD in it to stay on top of it. So it is a challenge for organizations to really weed through this. What's kind of just marketingware, what's a real solution, and then what does my business really need? But again, I would take a very prudent approach. Don't worry about the solutions in the market. Worry first about your business problem.
Yeah.
The problem you're trying to solve. What's the solution for that problem? If Gen AI is the right solution, let's go make it happen, and then find the right way to implement that secondary.
Yep. We did spend about a month ago a session with cybersecurity, and some of it's the same thing. There's so much stuff out there. If you try to take everything on, you're going to fail. I think this is very similar. You have to identify, your simple way of being able to deal with this, your pieces that are most important to you, the things that drive your business the most, and start looking about how you can apply these to that. So absolutely. One other thing I wanted to, and you started mentioning use cases, and Rob, I know you even did, I think, in the slide where you broke down some general ones. But can you kind of go a little bit further, maybe on some that you guys have worked on in the past, use cases that you've done? And also I'm kind of looking through some of the question and answers up here, and someone had asked, I think it's a good question, if anybody else, because there was 25%, I think, that said that they were already using it, already doing something. So if anybody else wants to share a use case in chat or in Q&A, feel free to. We'll kind of we'll read that for you as well. But yeah, what type of use cases are you guys seeing out there that are causing the most effect of this?
Yeah, so there were a few. You might have seen the tiles when we were talking about the examples before that might be good to highlight right now. So the first is Morgan Stanley, which has been very public. There's a lot of good information out there on what they're doing. And their idea was to create the super agent. So how do they go through the tens of thousands of documents, right, that they have, their corpus of documents, in support of being the best financial advisor, a super advisor that you possibly could be with clients. Yeah. And so they are rolling. So think of it as a co-pilot, right, that takes the best. And so every agent, we should equalize the insight and knowledge and ability to advise and counsel across those agents. They've gone one step further since then, by the way, and they are in fact now in client sessions recording, having the note taking occur, which is automating the notes and action items and follow-ups coming out. So you see a lot that's happening there. Anything around co-pilots for summarization, bringing complex subject matter together. Another example. Let's go far away from financial services and let's go more into like operations. So. Yeah. Imagine all of the technical documents around, heavy equipment that you might run in process manufacturing. U.S. Steel has one of the largest mills in the country, and they, for all of their heavy equipment, are now equipping their mechanics, and technicians with a similar type of co-pilot that can accelerate their ability to serve and get heavy equipment back into service. And so you have that one. PwC, by the way, is rolling out. I don't know if anybody's are Suits fans here. Harvey Specter. There's this generative AI tool called Harvey that PwC is rolling out. Is going to be rolling out at scale that allows them to do all kinds of contract reviews. Imagine going through a large corpus of documents across your clients. There's a new regulatory need around sustainability, and you got to go find and update all of those. So there's just any number of use cases that are up and running right now. Ken, I don't know if you have any that you would add to that.
No, it's those use cases where there's large volumes of documentation that you have to cull through, and then you have to produce kind of summarized content. It's not like how much did we sell yesterday. That's a numeric use case, right? Or predict my financial performance next week. That's a numeric forecast. But if it's, hey, read all of these documentations, like the Morgan Stanley one, read 100,000 documents and tell me what I should advise this customer. That's a really good use case.
I think that's exactly right. And I think just think about it on the other side too, around the human capital challenge. So listen, we talk about call center, and listen, the idea is more and more you've got these co-pilots, and you also have self-service. It is tough to hire people in call centers. I mean, typically it's a difficult job to fill, and so. I don't think what you're going to see is layoffs. I think you see through attrition, we're just going to have need for less people in a job they really don't want to be doing. So now think about on the operations side, we've got over half of the baby boomers that have retired. They're taking a lot of knowledge with them. We look demographically about trying to hire enough people into the labor force. One could argue that use cases that help you drive labor resiliency is a significant focus of use case as well.
Yeah. And there was a question asked as well, and I think you guys have already kind of covered this, so I just want to call it out though. Kind of in the same vein, how do you see generative AI helping knowledge workers improve their productivity? The Morgan Stanley, I think, is a good use case of that, where people who are making investment decisions based upon all this information they have to be able to go through, and probably half the time can't get through all of it to even make the right decision. How are they able to take this and actually make better decisions from that? I think that's a good example of that. I don't know if you guys have any more you want to add as far as knowledge workers, but and that one would definitely fit.
Just imagine 12 months from now, or a year after Microsoft Copilot has launched for enterprise, and people start to get proficient with it. Imagine just sitting down and almost as if you're just voicing out, hey, I want to do a presentation on this topic. These are the 5 points that I care about. Or by the way, just take a deliverable that you already have and say, give me a presentation off of this, and it's going to save you hours. And that's just one of innumerable number of examples that's going to occur. I can tell you this. I know that I'm pretty poor about all of the tracking of action items and follow-ups and orchestration. And I think as soon as we see that we're all able to get, really an AI-based assistant that follows up on all those things, that's going to save us a lot of time. There's just incalculable ways that this is going to manifest. And I don't think we fully know exactly what that's going to look like, but I'm pretty sure that we can have this conversation a year from now and see that things look and feel different.
Yeah, and that's spot on, because like I mentioned before, I've used tools where before, it's helpful to describe the presentation well, like you just said, and they will actually do that now. Now with the Copilot and Microsoft, I could see people will just use that directly within PowerPoint. Create me a slide that does this with these type of statistics and whatever that, whatever I want to see. And even myself, I'm on a lot of different calls, so having basically a note taker that will take notes does one thing for you, but it even goes beyond that to describing within that call, analytics from it, who talked the most, what was the sentiment with, some of the questions back and forth. And some of it's right, some of it still takes some work to train, but even these are the follow-up actions I should have from this. That type of stuff is, for me, a huge time saver, because I hate to write and take notes while I'm talking to someone, and it kind of handles that for me and helps me be more productive. Here's one other question, and I'm be honest with you, from this why you guys are here, that I wanted to ask. Where'd it go? I lost it now. Oh, and I think that's because somebody answered it. Ken, I think you already answered it. Just to kind of mention it to everybody, recent LLM announcements have amounted to now with more tokens. What does that mean to 6.0, if anything?
Yeah, well, a token is when you send these words over and then it processes the words and comes back with a response. It's kind of like paying by the minute. You're actually paying by the token, which is these word parts. So it's not paying by the letter or the words. They're just like chunks of words. So basically, right now, these pipes have a limitation to how many tokens you can actually send back and forth, and all the vendors are expanding that. So you're actually going to be able to send more information over and get more information back, but you're paying per token. So it's just metering your interaction with these language models.
Yes. One of the other questions that came up was about copyright, and I've kind of questioned this myself, because there's a tool that I've used before that I can describe an image that I want to create, and it creates some amazing things. Now, the better you are, just go back to training, the better you are at describing it, what you want, and the different parameters it's expecting, the better you get. But how does that work, and other things with copyright type of things? And that was one of the, I forget who that was from, but there was a question that came out from that.
Yeah, certainly something to monitor, right? Because copyrighted, the key to this question is, what data is inside the large language model? How has it been trained that you're using for your decisions in your organization? If copyrighted material was loaded into this large language model and then you have access to it through this, then yes, what's happening right now in the courts, they're trying to say you don't have access to this. Those large language model owners are going to have to remunerate the copyright owner for their use. So there could be sensitivity there if you were actually leveraging that information.
Yeah,
these litigants may come after organizations. But if you're heads up on how you're building these models, if you're training your own model, you can control that and create, like the Morgan Stanley 100,000 documents. Those were their documents, right? There's no copyright issue there. So it's just a matter of really understanding how the models were built that you're going to use. And it gets more opaque when you're using these third-party generative AI solutions, because it's baked into Salesforce, for example. So you have no idea what they're using, and then litigation could come after you as the end user. So it's just something to watch out for as you're designing.
Absolutely. And we're going to dig deeper into some of these conversations. And we even have, I think, one of the subjects we had talked about doing in part of the series was cybersecurity, and what are the executives, what are their responsibilities for these things. So those will be some of the other topics we can dig into. I want to close at least the panel discussion out with just one for both of you guys. And pretty much everybody, like I said, what's on here are at the executive level, either, like I said, either CEO, CTO, CXO, CFOs, somewhere in that realm. If you were one of those that's kind of on here listening or listening to this live or recorded, what would you guys be doing about generative AI? Where would you guys be putting your focus?
Yeah, well, listen, I think it starts, and we've talked about this before. What is the strategic impact of this capability to your industry and your company? And specifically within that, the differentiator here is going to be who has the data. And so if you're an industry leader and you've got the best in class data around, for instance, if you're waste management, the 360-degree sustainability loop of solid waste and recycling, what can you do with that? To drive impact and create service and those things. So you have a real unique advantage in your data, and I think you're becoming more and more aware of that now than you ever have before. What's going on in your industry and your company? How can you take advantage of it? Would be, I think, the first thing that we would make sure we were talking about. Ken?
Yeah, that's right. At least bring everybody together, your executive team together, to align on a decision to either protect or explore, and then move forward from there. So you have something to say to your board when they ask you, what are you guys doing about Gen AI? At least get to the point where you say, we've understood it, we've discussed it, we've made a decision, and here's how we came to this conclusion.
Yep. But as always, we have guys like Rob and Ken who are out there working with people every day. They're more than glad to get in those conversations and help with this stuff as well. So and Tag loves working with these type of clients. So we are, I apologize, a couple minutes over. I'm just now noticing. I do want to at least, Ken, can you throw up the slides one last time? And I want to at least introduce the next one that we have coming up, just so everybody's aware. And please, like I said, this is a series of them that we're going to be walking through a number of different things as part of this. So the next one we have coming up is how AI delivers margin expansion. We talked about that a little bit in this one, but we're going to again dig deeper into that. November 2nd, 2023. You all know the year. With Ken and Rob again, we're glad to have you guys on here. Should be about the same time. Typically, we like this time. It's a good time to have people on. So again, you'll be getting more stuff and materials from this to register, and looking forward to. And if there's any feedback on some of the use cases you guys are looking at, like the question said, we'd love to get the messages back through LinkedIn or whatever. Ken and Rob and I are all on LinkedIn. I'm more than glad to hear that, or you'll hear him follow up from us as well. So love to hear those things, and any other things that you guys may be concerned about with this. Please let us know. We love being able to have these conversations. Honestly, we could be on here for another probably 2 or 3 hours and still be going. So we'll split it up into 4-part series, so you don't have to hear us all at once. So again, Rob and Ken, thanks for joining us. Looking forward to November 2nd, and looking forward to hearing back from more of the people that are on here. But have a great day. Thanks, guys.
See you, everybody.